Well, I want to thank everybody that's gotten in and situated today. We are going to be talking through growth through an M&A strategy and what that means for blending sales, marketing for successful mergers and acquisitions. So, on behalf of everybody at SmartBug, we thank you for joining us. And I am Tonia. I am a senior sales executive here at SmartBug. I work with our emerging enterprise clients, and I also have the pleasure of fostering relationships with our PE and VC partners. So as a result of that, I have the pleasure of chatting with Chris Codelli and Lindsey Becker from Exig. They have both kind of run the gamut and seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of what growth through M&A looks like. Chris and I had the pleasure of working together when he was with Marlin, and on the operations side, leading marketing efforts and helping organizations come together in a solid way. Today, Chris is the VP of Global Revenue Operations at Exig, and Lindsey comes to us with a fast-paced background on NASDAQ, and today is leading marketing at Exig. So they together have had the opportunity to work on both the PE side as Exig was coming together and going through acquisitions, but now under one roof in the same organization. So I'm going to turn it over to you first, Chris, let you give a brief introduction, and then if you can pass the torch to Lindsey for us.
Sure, thanks. Happy to join you guys. Yeah, so I've been had a long career of starting in sales and sales leadership, and then sales operations as an operator with a lot of high-tech companies, all high-tech, small and large, and then spent 6 years with Marlin, a PE company, as a go-to-market operating exec. And one of the companies that I supported that we acquired and was Exig. And fairly recently, within the last 5 months, I decided to move back into the operator role with Exig, in large part because I felt like they were well positioned for a solid exit at some point in the future, given their prospects. So happy to be back in the operating environment, and nothing against the PE firm. I had great experience there. I worked with a number of companies, but very, very happy to be back working as an operator with Exig. So, Lindsey?
There may be no one happier than me, Chris, because I get the joy of partnering with you more closely every day, and I am grateful for that. But like Tonia said, my career started at NASDAQ, and when I started, not to date myself, it was only the NASDAQ stock market, only trading one asset class in the United States. And after my career there, it was a global company, and my role there took me through at least 5 or 6 acquisitions, which allowed me to actually grow and develop my career into a role leading a marketing team that then got acquired and merged with another firm. So my whole career has really been one M&A activity after another. And that was one of the things that drew me to Exig, seeing the way that the firms were being combined, the confidence and the strategy Marlin took to invest in the go-to-market function in order to propel the firm into growth, into a successful exit, was really exciting to bring all of my skill sets together in one place. So thrilled to be here.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Lindsey. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Just a few quick kind of rules of engagement before we get deep into discussion here and conversation. We are going to keep things conversational today. So really want to invite all of our viewers to use the chat, use the Q&A functions for today's webinar. Our speakers are here to help. As you can tell, based on their bios, Chris and Lindsey come with a deep background, and we want to help you. What I hear most of the time is, I don't know what I don't know. Right. And so there's tons of lists, there's tons of articles, there's tons of information out there that you can find on here's best practice, here's what you should do. But what's a little harder to uncover is here's what I wish I would have known, or here's what I wish someone would have told me, or here's the pitfalls or where the bodies are buried. So encourage you to use that as we kind of go through things. You probably saw our poll when you first joined, and try to usually keep those pretty, lighthearted and fun. But, when you go through growth through M&A, it's it's not like you get to go pick out this brand new house and everybody moves in and gets all new furniture and it's like a lovely family, right? So if you're sitting there and facing this today and you're thinking about, okay, if I had to describe my family, like what are we? Are we the clan from, Home Alone? Or are we the Brady Bunch? Like which family are we? And we're here to kind of help, like, how do you pull that together, right? It's common business strategy. Organizations are looking to either gain market share, they're looking to diversify their product offerings, they're going into a new, geographic market. There's all kinds of reasons that M&A is going to be a strategy, but it creates a host of hurdles, particularly for these sales and marketing teams. There's lots of challenges. It requires careful planning, effective leadership, as these two can probably tell you. And, and the lessons learned, I think, are invaluable. So there's a few key things that we probably will talk through is like that synergy of realization, the integration of IT systems, culture, reputation management. So first, let's have a little bit of fun and see how people did sum up their organization so that Chris, Lindsey, we have an idea of who we're going to be talking to today and in what voice we are. So what family is it? So if you had a chance to select, are you the Brady Bunch, Parent Trap, Full House, or Home Alone? And let me put you both on the spot. What would you have called Exig? Which family would you have been? And I want to see if you have different answers.
That's funny. I would say Full House.
Okay.
Definitely not Home Alone. Full House is probably, although I have to admit, I'm not totally familiar with all these. So, but I would agree with Lindsey.
Excellent, excellent. And it looks like 100% of our participants picked the Brady Bunch. So that's that tells me that probably top of our list, I had kind of prioritized all the different key points when you're going through M&A. And the one I put at the top of the list was that integration and consolidation of systems, right? And I think Brady Bunch is a perfect explanation of where that comes into play, right? You've got mature organizations that are coming together. They've got things that work for them. And, where do you start and how do you do it right? So I'm going to, start with that kind of decoding those challenges and let, Chris, you and Lindsey jump in. Where do you start? What's the first thing? Like where should people begin?
Go ahead, Chris.
Well, I think the start is actually before you make any decisions. I mean, I think it's really important to go into a final decision process to the degree that you have control over or influence a decision to finalize a merger or an acquisition, to make sure that you've done not just the obvious, and by the obvious I mean all the financial metrics, the financial analysis, but really what gets missing a lot of times are issues like, the people issues in particular, cultural fit, because those, and it's not that they would necessarily, cause you to decide one way or another not to proceed, but at least you go in with your eyes open, because if you've got cultural fit issues, it takes, you've got to be very purposeful about addressing those out of the gate. So that they don't get in your way. If you uncover those after the fact, as you try to embark on, a number of initiatives, whether they be cost-cutting synergies or market opportunities, and you've got cultural mismatch, it is exponentially more challenging, and you likely will find yourselves taking much longer to get through your integration goals than you otherwise would.
Yeah, and thinking about the organizations that we partner with, sales and marketing and go-to-market teams, there's a lot of pride and passion that goes into representing a company, a story, a narrative, and a brand. And to bring that together and to wonder what the fate of that is or how that's going to look in a new environment can be both personally and professionally challenging. And ensuring that, not only do all the cultures fit, but that there's really consistent, good communication and transparency around that, it can be unnerving. Another thing to piggyback on what Chris said is that it's all, the data analysis, the models are done, the decisions are made, but those decisions aren't always made by marketers and aren't always made by salespeople or people that are thinking about the world that we live in every day. And so it's really important not to just start with a lot of assumptions that things have already been thought through or that decisions were made intentionally and just run with it. I made that mistake a few times thinking that, of course, all of these much, more involved, smarter people must know something I don't know. No, they don't. It just didn't come up, or it's not always the case. Sometimes it is. Sometimes there's a very intentional reason why decisions are made. But if you don't ask and elevate anything that doesn't feel right, or just anything that you want to make sure or have an opinion about, I would say that it's important not to assume that it's been handled, strategically all the time. And it's really, the littlest things can actually, have a trajectory into something that's more significant. So see something.
What's one of those little things that would be like a skeleton buried in the backyard? What's one of those little things that may get overlooked, you think?
Systems integration. I mean, not thinking through, duplicative systems or cancel, like synergizing a bunch of systems that they don't realize have a downstream effect. If you cancel that, then you're going to lose all of this data history and other important institutional information that needs to be handled. And if they just set a date without thinking through the impact of when that expense is going to no longer be a factor, and don't think about the details that go into not having that, it can throw off the models. That's one example. And another quick one is when they synergize an entire budget just because it looks like it's overlapping, and then you're stuck with twice the number of products with same amount of money to be able to support, just because it seems like it might look
at the front door.
Look it up on a spreadsheet.
We've definitely, or I've definitely been on the receiving side of that before too. And I think timing is a big issue that I heard from both of you. And like, how do you, make that evaluation and not make too quick of a jump where things, maybe there's legacy reasons that something's in place or something's been built on top of it. And I know preserving the metrics is incredibly important, but also being able to have that full visibility as things are coming together. So I've definitely been with teams where it's like, something's expiring, we have to merge and jump over here now. And it's like, wait, do we have enough time to do that? Or it's, we're just moving here because it's the system that's been in place longer, or more people are comfortable with it. And there's not always, justifiable reasons, that kind of validate that. So I love hearing that both of you kind of have learned through experience the prioritization of that. So is there, and maybe the answer is there isn't an answer that one size fits all, but, when is it time to start? How long do you watch before you jump and make decisions? Or how long do you let things kind of run independently before you start that consolidation?
Well, I think one of the things that, to your question a minute ago that gets overlooked, and tying to the question that you've just asked, it is very important early on, especially if you're dealing with smaller companies that are either they're both smaller, if it's a merger or an acquisition, or if the company that's being acquired is smaller. What you'll find is that you don't have a lot of breadth of knowledge in the people that that are associated with the companies, and so and at the same time, it's often an unavoidable byproduct of mergers and acquisitions that people make decisions to leave. And so it's very important very early in the process to take inventory of who has what knowledge about the systems, the processes, and that you put in place a plan to make sure that you minimize the risk associated with people walking out the door with knowledge that only they have. And so before you launch into any initiative to integrate anything, I think it's really important to understand who's got the knowledge that we're going to need. How do we make sure that knowledge is protected to the best extent possible? And there's a number of ways of doing that. obviously, through incentives and retention incentives and or, just making sure that there's a knowledge sharing process that takes place very early on in the process. But, I found myself, one of the lessons you learn the hard way is if somebody leaves and they were the only, they had the keys to the car and they left with the keys, it can be very painful and it can be very expensive and time consuming, rebuilding that knowledge, hiring outside experts to kind of do forensic analysis of, how systems have been set up or whatnot.
Yeah. And I had the exact same experience, even recently. And one of the ways, there's two ways in which I think you can help to mitigate the risks there. One is clear job descriptions. Every department, every role, even if they've been in the role a long time and it's changed, should have a documented job description, even if the employee writes it themselves, so they capture in a bulleted list all the ways in which all the things they're responsible for. I realized that even in my organization, I just took for granted that everybody knew what they had to do. And, I had moved folks around, promoted people here and there, but never really went back to articulate. So then when I had to explain or manage around to other organizations or integrations about what people did, I had to, scramble to get that created. And there were times when it wasn't clear where that value, what that individual little piece of the puzzle was that got lost in the shuffle. So I found that having job descriptions, detailed, even just a list of the software things that people have access to and things like that, or that they're functioning, is really helpful. The second thing is master documents of passwords, systems. Don't take it for granted that you'll remember, or everyone's got it somewhere. Having a very secure, centralized place, and having a process and procedure in place for managing, the admin, the password, and the users of each of the systems is really critical. And it'll just save hours and lots of frustration, even if there is that attrition, to be able to know that you at least have a place to start. It can be a lifesaver. In the most recent case with Exig, a gentleman chose to leave from the engineering team. Well, nobody realized that was the only individual that really had the web coding, skill set that we needed to make certain critical updates to the website. And we didn't know until we needed it. And so little things like that are really important to try to get ahead of.
That's a really good detail. And it kind of goes back to that initial analogy of like moving into this house together, right? And maybe it belonged to someone and you don't know, like, what does this switch do? And I love that you both put people and culture first when you started the conversation. And it is so important because as much as it's growth and opportunity for an organization, it can be scary for the individuals that are in the inside, and preserving that and, kind of bringing everyone along and supporting it can be challenging. It can be challenging when you're looking at, the impact it can have on the business. It can be challenging when you're thinking about why you came together and what you're trying to accomplish. But, those bumps and hiccups, how do you prevent them from being felt at the customer level? And that's a, perfect transition where we are with like going through the brand implications that it can have, and, customer communications. Those are all things in and of themselves as a topic, right? Like how you translate, this new brand, or what is the new brand, or what's going to change, or what does it look like for me? But before you even get to this announcement phase, before you even get to the customer facing information, there are things that could be happening behind the scenes that your customers feel just because of what your teams are going through as they're trying to merge and come together. So I think there's kind of like a little bit of hurdle to come through there, and making sure that you're evaluating things in the proper order, prioritizing them right, and keeping everyone comfortable, informed. I love the idea of job descriptions because information and communication is so key to all of that, right? I think people can get on board as long as they aren't in the dark, and as long as they have clear understanding of why certain decisions are being made, or why they're important, or how they're going to impact the long-term health and growth of the organization. So, would love to kind of hear your thoughts there as you kind of transition to, how do we protect the customer now? Like, how do we make sure that this is a great experience and we're not scaring them to jump ship and go to a competitor through all of it?
Tonia, you said you said a word a minute ago in your conversation there that I think is really the key, which is prioritization. I think there is an absolute just temptation to take on way too much when you embark on these integration initiatives, and you really need to prioritize and be honest with yourself about the resources, and the prioritization should be driven by impact to the business and very specifically impact to the customer. And if you're changing out all your systems, and that's going to with a lot of it driven by internal efficiencies, but you can't get order forms out to customers or invoices out to customers, or they're incorrect because you're in the middle of an integration, and those invariably come with challenges, and you don't have the resources. Your resources are spread too thin because you've taken on too much. That can really put you behind and cause real issues with top line, right? A lot of these mergers and acquisitions are driven by cost synergy opportunities. Those can quickly go down the toilet if you start doing things that impact the top line.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say that another thing is that it's really important to have the right balance of information. So prioritization is one, and then sequencing information, I think, is another really critical thing. You said transparency, internal communications, making sure everybody understands and is on the same page is critical. But if you overshare too early in the process and you distract your go-to-market teams by what could be, it can be incredibly damaging to your pipeline. If things can fall apart at any minute. I've been a part of several deals in my career that I already had the full plan out. I was ready. We thought it was happening. It was ready to go. At the last minute, it didn't happen. Is it frustrating that all that work was done? Yes. But if I had told my team and I had let them know that all of that was about to change and then it didn't, it would have been so distracting emotionally, personally, let alone, from a task perspective. So then again, if you wait too long and we wait till after the announcement and no one feels in the loop and they don't understand why, and they're finding out with other people, then they don't feel good, then they're resentful. Well, then you've really done something else wrong. So there's really this sweet spot in this cadence of communication from the top down. And it might be different for different roles. It might be different for different departments. It is not a one size fits all, really, strategy. And so you have to really know who to bring in when. Another mistake a lot of people that I've made that you don't want to make is thinking that it's because it's a secret and it's so confidential, you can do it all yourself. Because a lot of us that are trying to speak at the strategic level and advise and understand and map out, then if we don't pull in our certain members of the team soon enough, you're gonna be stuck doing all that execution, or the person you do bring in has to execute last minute without really understanding, right? So you have to be thoughtful about who and when information should be shared internally.
You're absolutely right. And, even though I get to talk to those organizations going through it on a regular basis, SmartBug ourselves, we've grown through M&A. And I can remember a time where there was something I was tasked to do and I didn't really understand why, and it wasn't in line with what I was prioritizing in my current role. And then it was kind of explained to me, there's a reason that we're doing this, the order we're doing it, you're going to be impactful to our growth, and things will make more sense, in the coming weeks, but, just so you have a little bit, why it changes everything, right? It's like, okay, I can get on board with that. Like maybe it's not in line with what I was thinking or how things were going, but okay, there's something bigger happening, and, and it's going to, all be realized soon. And that was all that I needed, for that time, but it can make such a difference. And, one of the words that I picked up on that you just said, Lindsey, was it can leave people feeling like confused and maybe resentful. And even though they may feel that personally and carry that personally, that could carry off to their teammates, could carry off to customers if they're client facing. And you know, the transparency and preventing that, making sure that everybody's like on the same path is a really, really good advice, I think, kind of as a takeaway. So
and that's reputational risk, right? So you have one employee that feels like they were out of the loop and resentful that, or feels that, or they get a hold of a piece of information and they're like using it as a power trip, and they're at a happy hour and they say, well, don't tell, but, you know, that can have significant deal impact and reputational risk. So, you know, there are a lot of, you know, consequences, you know, there are a lot of different ways to take that.
Chris, what are you thinking? I know you've got a lot thinking there, probably as many as you've done of these accusations. You're probably like, I can remember when that happened, or yeah, I would have, you know, told somebody that they probably need to be thinking about this.
Yeah, I think, you know, back to the question you asked about, you know, before launching in, what is, you know, one of the things that's important is to, you know, make sure not, you know, let's take, for example, a systems integration process. I think there's oftentimes it's about the technical aspects of that, looking at the data models and reconciling, you know, data and mapping data and all that. But I think it's really important to really understand the business processes and the workflows on both sides before any assumptions are made. You know, and make sure that you're capturing the best, even if you end up saying, you know, we're going to, you know, we're going to, you know, the platforms on this side of the house are the ones we're going to migrate to. That doesn't mean that, you know, there may be one or two or three or a handful of really powerful business processes that are or that are part of what's implemented and embedded in the system that you're, you know, that you're leaving, and that you know, that needs to be captured, because oftentimes, you know, the bigger company, you know, there's almost kind of this default assumption that the bigger company or the acquiring company, you know, that it's going to be the predominant, their systems are going to be the ones you run with. But you could be losing a lot of value by not first really understanding, again, from a business process, not just a technical and data structure process, what the, you know, what's been implemented, why, and so forth. Because you might actually uncover things about the business that you didn't know, that due diligence didn't surface, that are really important. And so just blindly going into, you know, a merger and acquisition with an approach that says, you know, this company's systems are going to be the ones we're moving to, without really understanding what the other company is has implemented, can really cause a lot of downside potential. So
I'm sure there's a lot of pride and ownership that goes into that too, right? Especially if they were the ones that launched it or onboarded or suggested some of those changes. So when you're looking at that transition piece, what do you do when you have potential like clashes of culture or differences of opinion when it comes to that, you know, system architecture, or, you know, process? How do you, what happens if you're clashing on like our way is the better way? How do you mitigate that?
I think it's important for management to really take the lead in reminding people that, you know, we're all in the same boat together, and everybody will benefit if, you know, to the extent that we take a measured approach to really assessing what's in the best interest of the go forward environment. And, you know, that they're, you know, that everybody feels like they're being heard, and that they can make contributions to the end state. If they're, you know, and we had a little bit of this at Exig in certain quarters, with a belief that, you know, one team was railroading the other team, and that leads to attrition, and that puts a lot of things at risk.
Yeah, I mean,
the last thing you want to do in a merger and acquisition situation is have to backfill and hire people, because you're losing people because they're not satisfied that they're being heard, and they feel they have, contributions to make, but they're not getting their day in court.
Yeah, I think what you just said, Chris, is so critical, and that is hearing people feel heard. There's a lot of listening that needs to happen across the board on both sides. And I think that that's a critical step, just to take a minute and do that listening and cross learning instead of jumping right in and just to implement. Again, based on assumptions, another real-time example of what we're talking about is Exig acquired a company called Enix, and they were a small, about 50-person or so French company based in Paris, whereas Exig was closer to more than 200 people based in St. Louis, and had already done an acquisition, and we were looking at our marketing automation system, and we were looking at our processes, and Enix did everything out of HubSpot. They did their CRM, they did their marketing automation, they did everything. Well, the decision was made to go with Exig's Salesforce instance. That made all the sense. And that decision was made, which means that the Enix CRM was going to merge there. That did not automatically mean that everything else that went with their HubSpot instance had to go Exig's way too. And in fact, we ended up deciding to use the Enix HubSpot as our go forward platform, because they had recently completed a data hygiene initiative. They had very clear processes documented in place that Exig was still sorting through from a previous acquisition. And it gave us an opportunity to do a significant data hygiene initiative on the Exig side, so that we were porting in really fresh, clean data and starting from a really united, positive front. And it created a little bit more work in terms of changing some URLs and technical, but it was the right decision for all of us. And I think that is a really good example how just because one decision is made doesn't necessarily have to be a ripple effect. You really just have to consider how and why something is being used, or how and why something is being done a certain way, and think about what the path forward should and could look like. And I think when you're collaborative and you listen and you think, if you remove all that pride of ownership, right, from it, then you can be really successful. And that's really where SmartBug has been such a great partner to us is
I didn't pay her to say that, everybody. I did not.
But no, I mean, but for sure, I mean, we had to then, connect systems that were, but I think we made the right choices. So yeah.
I remember that being a part of the early conversations, because I was in the background saying, what are we doing for ROI? Like, what are we doing for ROI? And it's like, we got to get our systems right first. Like, we've got to get these things aligned. We'll get there. And it took a little bit of time to get there. Right. But starting with data hygiene is so key. And I want to read a question to you from someone in the chat that just came up, and it's, actually really good timing for it. But they said, I'm concerned about aligning our data and reporting in a consistent way. What metric definitions should they prioritize to get the team to align on?
I love that question. It's hard to answer because each organization is different. I'd say, what does success look like for your organization, both from a business perspective and an integration perspective? Are there synergy timelines you need to hit? Are there growth targets you need to hit? Are the targets aligned? Are they being tracked separately? For example, Enix maintained a separate target and track for at least a year strategically after, and now we're bringing those things together. But there was an intentional period of time where we track separately. So really understanding and being on the same page across the organization around what those targets and goals look like, what are the expectations, and then taking a step back, regardless of what you're currently measuring, and thinking about, okay, what do I need to measure to be successful? Map that out, then see what you have, and then find a way to meet in the middle somewhere.
One of the things I'll add to that too, and want to hear your thoughts as well, Chris, is are they defining things the same way? And have they been measuring things, apples and oranges, in the past, to kind of realign on what's important as the two come together? So, Chris, what are your thoughts in that stream of thought?
I think that, you know, what I've seen happen, the lesson I've learned is because much of my M&A exposure experience has been with smaller companies, is that the quality of the data and of the processes of generating that data is paramount. And a lot of companies, you know, hire people to build out reports and dashboards and measure things, but the quality of the data is suspect. If you don't, for example, if you're measuring, you know, progress through a sales cycle, but the sales stages are not well defined, and or your sales reps are not, there's no discipline in terms of timely and accurate updates, and you know, the metrics can be very worthless. So I would say before you get too focused on metrics, make sure that what you're measuring is being sourced in a way that is reliable and that, you know, there's high integrity. Because to me, that's step number one. And then step number two is keep it simple. You know, measure. You know, there's no shortage of resources out there on kind of how to, you know, to manage metrics for example, for funnel metrics or pipeline health, but don't overcomplicate it. And at the same time, and especially if the merger and acquisition involves businesses that are somewhat different in nature, like for example, when, at Exig, we've got the legacy Exig business is a very large deal, enterprise deal kind of business, smaller number of transactions, but much more complex and large. Whereas the company that initially we combined with Exig was Vela, much smaller deal size, much more transactional. The way you manage those types of businesses and the way you report on them and monitor them and the metrics you use, they may be the same metrics, but for example, when you're trying to do things like forecasting, you can't apply the same approach to forecasting a transactional business as you can to a large deal business. So a large deal business needs to be much more grounded in accurate, detailed information from a bottoms-up perspective that's being provided by the reps and fully rounded out by a sales manager's perspective on the likelihood of that deal closing. With transactional, higher volume businesses, you can look at historical data, and usually there are trends. But if you apply those trends to large deal kind of environments, you set yourself up for major surprises because you know, one deal can swing a forecast. So it's really, so I'd say keep it simple. Acknowledge if you've got, you know, different facets to your business that need to be measured in a different way. But rule number one is make sure what you're building your metrics, the data you're building your metrics on, is of high value and that you can rely on it.
I'd say keep an open mind, right? Too. I mean, that goes back to listening and everything that Chris is saying. I mean, make sure that you're open to thinking about things in different ways and in different definitions of things you may have, you know, taken for granted for a really long time.
Yeah, and I'm gonna walk backwards a little bit to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, because when you bring up the fact about, you know, say you went through an acquisition and it's two different kind of lines of business, right, that need to be measured separately, that can also impact that rollout of brand messaging, because it isn't we've acquired someone just like us and now we're bigger. It's we've acquired someone and now we're offering a different service or we're targeting a different area. So how and when or how long do you wait from a timing perspective to think about evaluating whether it's the brand messaging overall which brand has the most equity, or if it's product messaging, and how the two then blend together, and when is the right time to communicate that, and start pushing that. Because the feeling that I get and what I've experienced is the systems and the technology and making sure everyone is sorted, organized, and metrics are in place is that's where we start, right? But we also have to be able to carefully roll out the customer facing part from a messaging standpoint. So where has that come into play for you, and what are some lessons learned there?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really, really great question. And I think that the messaging piece is something that really needs to be thought about, or like one of the first things to think about, even if it feels like it's not going to be used until later in the deal. The understanding and the strategy, and then what of that strategy is how that gets communicated to customers is critical. And I think that really making sure that you're putting yourself in their shoes, thinking about what the impact to their day-to-day is first. Forget like the big picture, like this is a great story to tell. I love telling stories. That's my favorite thing to do. But out of the gates, the message has to start at the impact to the customer. Will this change their day-to-day at all? And if so, how? And if so, what are they going to be required to do? Is there going to be a new, for example, we're doing this now, a new bank account? Is there going to be a new, invoicing system? Or is there going to be a new rep? There's so many pieces of the puzzle that may impact that customer. That's where it all starts. And then you kind of roll back from there. But I'd say that a trap not to fall into is to let internal messaging inform your external messaging. So many times, even as far as like code names for deals, start to get used really loosely and can leak into external messaging. The way that you talk about things, you really need to be thoughtful and make sure that you are using a language that the audience understands. As I say that, what's also critical is to think about the different audiences that you're speaking to. It is another situation where messaging isn't one size fits all. There's customer messaging, employee messaging, investor messaging,
Prospect messaging.
Yeah, exactly. And media and industry influencer messaging. And it's all probably a derivative of a master plan. However, you really need to be thoughtful about who cares about which pieces of information, and what's important to your customers won't necessarily be what's important to your investors, but they're both very critical audiences.
Yeah, well, Tonia, what was going through my mind a minute ago when you, as a lead up into that question, was a lot of it's going to depend on what the reasons that, what the reasons were that drove, from a go-to-market perspective, that drove the merger and acquisition, the merger or acquisition to begin with. So oftentimes, for example, it's a customer expansion play. So a company will acquire another company because they want to leverage an existing customer base to sell more to them, versus just a sheer adding to the new logo potential out there. Those are very different objectives, and especially if it's a customer expansion objective, that really calls for doing analysis, white space analysis, to understand what is the full set of opportunity, what is current share of wallet, before you can even start tracking and monitoring how you're doing against the expansion goals. So again, it comes down to laying the groundwork for what you want to measure before you just blindly head into measuring it.
I can see that. And it's, sometimes, again, I don't think we can stress enough through all these situations. It's not because it's the organization that's been in market the longest, or it's not because it's the one that's the biggest, or the one that has, it's back to a lot of different nuances that could kind of, one over the other owns different segments of some of the things that we've talked about today, whether it's technology, the messaging, the alignment of metrics. It's definitely a lot of pieces to come together. So just one more reminder to the people that are listening with us, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat there. From a reputation management standpoint, are there any pitfalls that you would be willing to share? Because reputation management is one of those things, right? Like if you had a hiccup in it, you definitely don't want to talk about it, particularly on a webinar. It's going to be recorded and downloaded and blasted out to hundreds, thousands of people because we're a marketing company. But I do think it's helpful to know, when you're trying to delicately handle these things. I think it's important for anybody listening to know that we would be lying to you if we said it's always going to go perfect, that the best laid plan is going to roll out easily. There are going to be struggles. There are going to be hurt feelings. There are going to be mistakes. There are going to be times to punt and say, oh, we should have done this a different way. But managing that reputation, I think, is the most important part. So the transparency, the communication, to me, those seem like the things that, that if you do that right, even if you make a mistake, there's room to recover and protect that, whether that's reputation management through your staff, your employees, your customers, your prospects, your, whoever that is. So one thing we haven't talked about yet is what about, how do you determine you've got two teams coming together? We're back to our Brady Bunch scenario. You got a lot of talents, a lot of skills, how do you integrate that together and start making decisions so that it feels synergistic, right? And no one feels replaced or, set aside, but that you're really evaluating the key and core talents and how they can, bring the most value and advantage. And overall, I think, make people happier, right? If you've been carrying the burden of one thing in your job description all along, and now there's someone like you that maybe picks up some weaknesses, it's, it just makes everybody stronger. But that's definitely, I can see there are probably times where you experience like peacocking or wait, no, I'm the better person to do this. So how do you do that successfully? That seems like a tough one to me.
Yeah, that's been something that I've struggled with, or actually I've learned to see it as an opportunity.
Nope, I don't know. I think we might have been losing you there for a second, Lindsey.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Can you hear me now?
We can.
I see these moments as an opportunity. I think it can be incredibly challenging, especially when people and livelihoods are impacted by decisions made. I think what I've found to be really an important tool is to take names off of org charts and to really look at skill sets, whether you know the individual or not, whether you've worked with them for 20 years or they're coming in and they just started. You need to really assess what are the skills that you need to have a high performing team. And then based on those skills, how does that map to the talent that you have to work from? And in some cases, skill sets you need going forward are not the same as the skill sets you needed pre-acquisition, no matter what side of the merger you're on, right? So you could be going from a very enterprise focused, like.
I'm going to let you finish that sentence, Chris.
No, I don't think I can.
We'll give her a few seconds. What are your thoughts on blending teams and finding, skill sets, talents?
Yeah, well, first of all, I really think it's important that it starts with executive communication on getting everybody on the right page around what what's in it, for them and for the company, with regards to the value of the merger or acquisition, whatever the case may be, and then discussing how they each can play a part and a role in that. So, we at Marlin and our portfolio companies, we really feel strongly about creating an aligned set of OKRs, right, that are cascading, where you've got a key set of executive initiatives at the highest level, and then you build that out down the organization so that everybody understands how what they're doing is tied in and relevant to supporting key objectives. And so we find that's an extremely powerful way to get everybody aligned, but also make sure everybody understands the impact they're going to have on a company meeting and realizing the value in a merger and acquisition move.
Yeah. And when that's executed properly, do you get that feedback? Like, have you had people come back to you and say, we really appreciated the way that this rolled out, or, this was, having gone through probably poor rollouts of this before, and then, seeing it done right, I'm sure that it's evident, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's key to healthy engagement. I mean, engaged employees are healthy employees. I mean, it's that's the biggest predictor of employee attrition is what the level of engagement is, and people want to feel like what they're doing matters to the company, and they want as much specifics and as much transparency on their relevancy to the company goals. And so it's really important to have a process that ties all that in, so that they get that understanding, and they're not off in a corner wondering whether anybody even notices what they're doing.
Right. Or making assumptions, which can sometimes be even scarier.
Yep.
Well, we are getting down to our last few minutes, so I'm going to ask a question. What didn't I ask? What didn't I ask you that you think people would want to know, or that we haven't gotten a chance to chat about yet?
We had an experience at Exig that I think it may not be that typical, but I think it's worth learning a lesson over, which is that there were some cost synergies that were assumed and as part of the merger and acquisition that we didn't learn until we got into it, involved things that were not 100% in our control. And without getting into the specifics of it, it basically, when we merged the companies, they had taken different approaches to the involvement of third-party services that are part of the equation with regards to what our customers need as part of our offering. And there was an opportunity to do some consolidation of those activities and those relationships with the third parties. But because of the nature of how those arrangements are managed in the case of our industry and these third parties, it involved requiring customers to re-sign contracts, no economic impact to them. But they just had to acknowledge that they were going to get their data from a different source, for example, than they had been previously. And that the impact of that, we're going to recognize the synergies. That's not the issue; it's the timing, because we serve large financial services institutions, and you can make an assumption they won't have an issue signing a document when there's no dollar impact to it. But have you ever tried getting time with attorneys at large financial institutions? So we experienced some slowdown. So I don't know. Like I said, I think this is pretty atypical. But the general learning is, make sure that if you are building into your plan meaningful synergies, that every aspect of what is going to take to actually realize those synergies is, that you've got control over it, and that you're not relying on somebody that is not party to the synergies and doesn't have visibility to those. That you're relying on them to somehow do something that that may be more difficult than you would think. So that would be a little nugget of learning that we definitely have experienced.
And just listening to you, even if I were to pick that up and put that into a smaller organization that wasn't, financial based in a similar situation, right? It could rock customers and, take perfectly happy existing customers and make them think, oh, whoa, 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 wait, do I have to rethink this? Is now a good time for me to, reconsider, the playing field, unnecessarily, right? And if you can avoid that, you want to avoid that at all costs.
Yeah. One of the things we didn't talk about, which I think is the bane of every marketer's existence, is clean customer data. And just knowing your customers and customer overlap. We talked a little bit about messaging and appropriateness. When you need to really understand where there's overlap, where there's not, and how those, even within the customer base, how those messages need to be really thoughtful. And I'd say that the more that you speak to your audiences that we already identified, employees, customers, as people and not as an account, and not as a faceless person, just an employee, and the more personalized and thoughtful your communication is, no matter what the decision making behind it, the more customized you can do. I think the more engaged, someone said that before, and I apologize when I dropped, but the level of engagement increases the more personalized an experience. And so I think really that's something to find, those moments where you really can take advantage and customize or personalize that engagement or that opportunity, and really make sure that you're bringing your audiences on this journey with you, not just telling them what's happened.
Appreciate that, Lindsey. And it's bringing them on the journey with you is, you've landed us in a perfect spot for closing of, we've walked through kind of what your journey has been at Exig and, your experience in the past, Chris, with many organizations that have walked this walk. And I just want to thank you both for the thoughtful advice, for being transparent about lessons learned. And I hope that everybody who was listening in or even listens later was able to get some, great takeaways from that. Look for in your inbox for some exclusive content that we'll follow up with about this. Can't thank you both enough, and appreciate you joining us today.
Pleasure.
Happy to be part of it. Thanks.
Thanks
everyone.
Bye now.